Here was a tradition that promised to maintain its vitality in times of collective spiritual drought, regardless of who was in charge. The choice that faced members was whether to submit to the authoritative pronouncements of the Orthodox tradition, or to leave the order and face the subjectivism and uncertainty of the postmodern American religious milieu. Given their long history of collective searching, worshiping, and serving, the majority chose to remain together. They thus embraced the option that seemed to offer the best chance of movement survival, the reaffirmation of tradition. The zealotry displayed by many of the order's Orthodox converts is also made comprehensible in Berger's schema. For those who are returning to the seemingly objective authority of an ancient religious tradition, the memory remains of how easily this worldview can lose its compelling plausibility. Although they now say anew that it can be no other, they remember the time when they thought that it could be other. This troubling memory is thus characteristically drowned out by assertive and self-reinforcing proclamations of the tradition's absolute truth. The reclaimed tradition is also protected against disconfirmation by the rigidly sectarian mentality that often emerges in neo-Orthodox groups. This exclusivist attitude allows the converts to huddle together for mutual support against a disbelieving outside world. CSB's new enthusiasm for converting secular Americans, especially New Agers, to Orthodoxy, and its increasingly shrill criticism of non-Orthodox worldviews are evidence of this proselytizing and sectarian trajectory. So far, this analysis has focused on change in the history of the order. Such a focus, however, brings up an important question. To what extent can an NRM jettison its original teachings, sense of mission, and cultural content, and still survive as a vital competitor in the contemporary religious marketplace? As Rodney Stark has argued, NRMs that accommodate themselves too quickly to conventional religious and cultural standards in the hopes of gaining respectability run the danger of losing their market edge. Put baldly, why should anyone want to convert to a movement that offers the same beliefs and practices as older, more established traditions? Stark concludes that successful NRMs do not abandon their original cultural content. CSB presents an interesting test case for Stark's hypothesis. Even its present members admit that on the surface at least, their brotherhood has few continuities with Blyton's Holy Order. CSB repudiates the early order's ecumenism and its corollary belief that all religions contain elements of truth. It has abandoned its Gnostic theosophical cosmology and Christology and adheres strictly to the doctrines of Eastern Orthodoxy. Blyton's revelations are now viewed as, at best, the effluvia of his own subconscious and, at worst, the teachings of demons. The Brotherhood has substituted Orthodox liturgical forms for Blyton's non-traditional sacramental rites and has dissolved its original hierarchical structure. Individual members have abandoned a communal lifestyle and now live in separate single-family dwellings. The early order's promotion of gender equality in its priestly hierarchy has been replaced by the Orthodox prescription of women in clerical positions. Finally, Blyton's millennialism, which looked optimistically forward to a dawning age of spiritual illumination, has been supplanted by a sectarian form of Orthodox apocalypticism. This more pessimistic vision focuses on a coming Antichrist figure who will, it is believed, lead most of humankind to damnation. The Brotherhood's substantial embrace of Orthodox doctrines, liturgical rites, and social praxis is not the whole story, however. Even as it underwent its radical transformation, the movement managed to retain several key elements of its original identity. The first of these was the group's commitment to charitable service. From its early distribution of hotel and food vouchers to the homeless through its establishment of emergency shelters in San Francisco, Portland, and St. Louis, the Brotherhood never lost its service ethic. Indeed, CSB continues to operate emergency shelters and has encouraged Eastern Orthodox parishes to expand their charitable activities beyond their ethnic enclaves. A second continuity relates to the group's consistent valorization of the monastic ideal. This valorization took early form in the 5 vows administered to recruits, the daily periods of prayer and devotion, and the Brotherhood's common garb and abstemious lifestyle. It was also present in the order's self-conception as an elite army of spiritual athletes. As the Brotherhood searched for a safe haven in the Christian Church, it was drawn to Russian Orthodoxy because of this tradition's continuing reverence for monastic spirituality. Although most CSB members now live in nuclear families, they understand their spiritual striving as an attempt to infuse the life of the householder with the spirit of monasticism. Perhaps the most eloquent evidence of this monastic continuity is the fact that the Forestville Ranch has now become St. Paisius Abbey, a monastic community of the St. Herman of Alaska Brotherhood. St. Paisius was an 18th century monk who is credited with preserving Orthodox monasticism during a period of spiritual decline in Russia. A third important continuity is the movement's ongoing interest in initiation, light mysticism, and supernatural experience. Blyton's initiatory path of baptism, illumination, and realization was deftly adapted in the Brotherhood's understanding to Orthodoxy's sacramental triad of baptism, chrismation, and anointing with holy oil believed to fill the believer with the Holy Spirit, and theosis, divinization. Moreover, the tantric light mysticism underpinning Blyton's signature initiation of illumination was seen to be congruent with the Neoplatonic light mysticism of Eastern Orthodox monasticism. CSB continues to reverence mystical experience within an Orthodox framework and commonly publishes members' reports of charismatic healings and spiritual visions. These otherworldly events often occur in connection with myrrh-gushing icons and the relics of saints. A fourth continuity relates to the movement's dramaturgical and ceremonial tenor throughout its history. The early order was a non-stop parade of Masonic Rosicrucian-inspired initiatory rituals conducted by priests and priestesses in full ceremonial regalia. This dramaturgical motive found a perfect complement in the ornate liturgies, the icon and candle-filled churches, and the colorful ecclesiastical vestments of Eastern Orthodoxy. The order's elaborate ritualism can be interpreted in several different ways. In one sense, it was simply a continuation of the dramaturgical expressiveness of the hippie counterculture. In this innovative subculture, persons who had rejected conventional identities committed themselves to the heady project of self-recreation. Ritual performance and psychotropic substances, as traditional cultures have long known, provided the most powerful means to accomplish this work. The counterculture's undisciplined style, however, made these experiments in self-reconstruction a dangerous gamble. Many persons found themselves stripped of their conventional moorings and set adrift in a subjective realm of imaginal, ephemeral, and often delusional self-representations. The Holy Order of Mans and many of the period's other NRMs offered a more structured and secure program of identity reconstruction. In the Order's case, transformation came through its elaborate and sophisticated system of ritual initiation. This system used all the elements of traditional religious dramaturgy, ritual gestures and implements, ceremonial vestments, candles, incense, chanting, and formulaic utterances to work its transformative magic. In a broader sense, however, the Brotherhood's dramaturgical emphasis is indicative of a hunger in American culture, evidence of which can be found, for example, in the nation's fascination with the pageantry and lifestyle of British royalty, for the emotional elevation and transcendence of the ordinary traditionally associated with displays of ritual magnificence. American evangelicalism's distrust of papal-like formalism and ceremonialism has done little to satisfy this hunger. Thus, individuals throughout American history have employed a variety of means, such as participation in fraternal orders like the Freemasons or Rosicrucians, to live out their urge for ceremonial self-transcendence. A final continuity throughout the order's history was its restorationism. From its inception in 1967, Blyton promoted a vision of the Brotherhood as a reincarnated cohort of the major figures of early Christian history. This cohort's avowed mission was to restore the ancient Christian mysteries to the modern church in preparation for the coming millennium. This restorationist mythos found continued expression as the group searched for its roots in the Christian tradition and planted itself finally in Eastern Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy, it was claimed, was the sole contemporary representative representative of the ancient apostolic tradition. CSB's recent attempts to affiliate itself with the Patriarch of Jerusalem can be interpreted as yet another variation on the order's perennial striving to re-embody Christianity's sacred primordium. As this delineation of continuities makes clear, the Brotherhood retained significant elements of its earliest identity, even as it underwent its radical metamorphosis. Perhaps this fact explains why the group has been able to preserve a modicum of coherence and solidarity between 1968 and 1993. With regard to Stark's thesis, it is simply too soon to tell whether CSB can strive in the long term after having accommodated itself so thoroughly to conventional religious norms. The Order's history, in addition to elucidating drivers of change in NRMs, provides a detailed case study of the processes by which these movements emerge from a cultural milieu, fashion an original system of beliefs and practices, and establish an institutional presence in the contemporary religious marketplace. The Brotherhood's evolution suggests that NRMs develop in a highly fluid manner and are riven with tension, ambiguity, and contradiction from their earliest foundations. This observation would seem to argue against the often romanticized view of these groups as monolithic in toto formations from their moment of origination, embarked upon an inevitable trajectory of success. Rather, NRMs can be more accurately understood as chameleon-like organizations that continually reshape themselves through processes of dialogue and accommodation with their larger cultural environment. In the late 20th century, this larger culture recreates itself with unprecedented speed. To remain competitive in this milieu, NRMs must continually refashion their public images and adapt themselves to the rapidly changing profile of potential recruits. The problem with such hyperflexibility is that it tends to dissolve the continuity NRMs need to survive as cohesive and coherent organizations. The process of conventionalization in American sects noticed by H. Richard Niebuhr, Liston Pope, and Rodney Stark were mainly correlated with long-term factors as a group's rising socioeconomic status and the death of its founding generation. Thus, sect-like movements changed gradually into denominations, but only after the passage of at least 50 to 60 years. It now appears in the contemporary context that conventionalization or co-optation by dominant religious structures may be taking place within the first generation itself. Moreover, the drivers of such change may no longer be the death of the founding generation or gradual changes in socioeconomic status. Rather, they may be related to the challenge of constructing a usable yet authentic identity in the contemporary domination of simulation and the powerful pressures to conventionalize wielded by masters of the image in religious and political life. The Order's history also sheds light on the processes of origination in NRMs. Earl Blyton in many ways resembles Stark's cult entrepreneur, an individual who, after serving an apprenticeship in one or more successful groups, begins his own movement. This new movement, Stark observes, is constructed from any number of extant doctrines and practices, including those of the groups to which the entrepreneur has previously belonged. Blyton crafted the order using elements from AMORC, Theosophy, Roman and Liberal Catholicism, the Subramania Yoga Order, the Freemasons, New Thought churches, and the Spiritualist movement. He had been a student of each of these perspectives and did not hesitate to appropriate whatever he found of value in them. Blyton's innovativeness, therefore, was not related to the content of his teachings, but rather to the unique combination of myths, doctrines, practices, and organizational forms that he used to formulate the order's identity. A careful study of other NRM founders often reveals this same capacity for creative synthesis and articulation of extant cultural materials. Another important developmental feature of the Order's history has to do with the group's sophisticated religious and cultural elaboration. Like many NRMs in their founding generation, the Brotherhood formulated new doctrines, liturgical rites, myths of origin, institutional structures, and sacred writings. Moreover, it created an alternative subculture complete with arts and crafts, small businesses, and schools, and redefine gender roles, ethical codes, and seasonal celebrations. Through these creative labors, the movement established itself as a plausible alternative religious community, offering innovative solutions to contemporary social and religious problems. Viewed from this perspective, the group's history provides an important case study of the process of cultural elaboration in new religious communities. It also provides a paradigmatic example of the experimental, contingent, and self-authenticating nature of this elaboration. From its earliest beginnings on Market Street in San Francisco, the order engaged in the ongoing production of its singular subculture. It enforced strict grooming and sexual codes and redefined gender norms by ordaining women priests. The initiatory status of each member was marked by a particular color of robe and a designated set of duties. The brother houses themselves took on a characteristic appearance, from the powder blue carpet of the chapels to the C. Rosseron Chambers portraits of Jesus and Mary on the walls. Over time, the order created its own festal calendar, developed an innovative primary school curriculum, and implemented an ethic of ecology in all facets of its daily activities. These cultural elaborations were often spontaneous responses to sudden crises or attempts to address long-standing intragroup tensions. When a particular practice proved to be untenable, for example the rigid segregation of men and women, it was simply discontinued and replaced by another experiment. As the Brotherhood adopted an increasingly conservative persona, its cultural elaboration became more self-conscious and deliberate. The group rummaged through the cultural and religious traditions of the past and appropriated a wide variety of customs and practices. The 1980s thus became a period of medieval mystery plays, Celtic harp making, icon painting, folk dancing, storytelling, and religious processions. With each new addition to its cultural repertoire, the group experienced a reaffirmation of its emerging identity as the ark of authentic traditions and preserver of orthodoxy in the post-Christian era. During the course of its journey to orthodoxy, the order experimented with roles, ideas, and practices that have since become commonplaces in the larger American cultural gestalt. Women, for example, play an increasingly dominant role in Catholic parishes and are now routinely ordained in the Episcopalian, Lutheran, Baptist, Presbyterian, and Methodist churches. A growing number of parents, in another instance, now teach their children at home or have organized small educational cooperatives that provide an alternative to the public school system. The majority of Christian churches, in a third example, are presently seeking to formulate and implement a Christian-based ethic of ecology, some through the order-inspired North American Conference on Christianity and Ecology. Confidential shelters for victims of domestic violence have sprung up in most American cities, and many of these programs have adopted such order innovations as a collaborative system of citywide donors and counseling outreach to the perpetrators of this violence. Finally, the order's rediscovery of Eastern Orthodox spiritual practices appears to have presaged a growing interest in these practices within Roman Catholic and mainline Protestant circles. Each of these developments supports the assertions of Edward Tiryakian and Phillip Hammond. NRMs should be taken seriously as laboratories of social experimentation. Within these groups, new models of religious and cultural activity can be implemented, refined, and, when successful, seeded into the larger culture. The Brotherhood's Odyssey also provides a suggestive case study of the impact on individual members of rapid change in NRMs. Participants in the Brotherhood's journey chose from 4 possible options when confronted with the group's major alterations of course. The first of these options, and the most common, was simply to leave. The movement's defection rate between 1969 and 1985 was about 50% for all recruits. 37% for life-vowed members, and 28% for priests. During Blyton's tenure as Director General, members regularly left with the introduction of each new rule or practice. After the director's death, changes in practice and policy continued to spark member defections. For instance, adherents left when the group inaugurated family missions, when it introduced Orthodox penitential devotions, and when it entered into jurisdictional union with Metropolitan Pangratios. Although the Brotherhood had a formal process through which disgruntled members could have their vows lifted, many individuals simply walked away from their center without informing anyone. The reason for such a course, according to several defectors, was their desire to avoid the burden of guilt that was often laid upon members should they go through proper channels. Not only would council priests accuse petitioners of turning their backs on the Master Jesus, but they would sometimes declare that these members were doomed to lead a pointless mission for the rest of their lives. A second option was to organize a circle of like-minded members and attempt a coup. These attempts occurred throughout the Brotherhood's history. Matthew Lipa and his students at 910 Steiner Street, who were unhappy with Blyton's institution of life vows in 1969, were involved in the first such revolt. The next, and partially successful coup, was that attempted by the master teachers against Ruth Blyton in 1974, the result of which was a power-sharing agreement between 1975 and 1978. James Harris and Marion Carter mounted a third rebellion in 1975, reportedly over concern that growing divisions within the movement were threatening its animating spirit. The last and only successful coup attempt occurred in 1989, when a circle of priests orchestrated the removal of Andrew Rossi as the Brotherhood's Director General. Other members responded to the rapid pace of change in the order by choosing a third option. They left and founded derivative organizations. These spin-off groups exemplify what William Bainbridge has termed the process of sporulation in NRMs. In this reproductive process, NRMs cast off spores, disgruntled members, who then create offshoot movements, some of which come to rival their parent organizations. Such groups as Scientology and the I Am activity have given birth to a large number of these derivative organizations. In the case of the Order, at least 4 new movements were created by ex-members. These include James Taylor's 1969 Order of St. Germain, Raison Ruiz's 1980 Society for Christ's Disciples, Ruth Blyton's 1987 Science of Man Church, and Stephen Thibodeau's Euphotic Foundation of Christ International. As of 1993, these new formations had been unsuccessful in attracting more than a small core of committed members. A fourth option was for members to remain in the Brotherhood and adapt themselves to its rapid pace of change. There were persuasive reasons to choose this option, among them the members' financial dependence on the group, their substantial investment of emotional capital, and the haunting sense of guilt and failure that was believed to accompany defection. Remaining within the Brotherhood, however, often exacted a heavy psychological toll. By consistently sacrificing their own desires and viewpoints, members risked losing all sense of self-determination and individuality and becoming passive, faceless, and obedient servants of the group's leadership. Social scientists have observed that a highly conformist mode of thinking is often the price of communal cohesiveness in NRMs. Individual members find themselves constrained not only to act in accordance with group norms, but also to think in accordance with the prevailing attitudes, goals, and values of their community. In order to accomplish this attitudinal adjustment, a movement and its members commonly implement 4 strategies. First, they convince themselves that the group's actions occur on a higher level of morality than that of the larger society. Thus, the behaviors of the movement's leaders, however erratic or irrational, are accorded an inherent moral value and are thus beyond question or criticism. Second, the group's members create and reinforce among themselves rationalizations for sudden changes of emphasis or direction. In the case of the Order, for instance, CSB members rationalize Blyton's early Rosicrucian theosophical teachings as temporary bait used by God to lure them into a disciplined spiritual community. After hooking them with this bait, God had reeled them into holy orthodoxy. A third strategy is to engender self-censorship mechanisms in each member. This can be accomplished by encouraging the confession of wayward opinions to the group's leaders, by relentlessly castigating members for holding secret thoughts antithetical to the group's welfare, and by convincing members that their innermost thoughts are being perceived by others. Order members, for example, were socialized into the lore of the Adept, which credited the group's leaders with telepathic powers. The widespread belief in these powers fostered heroic attempts at self-censorship on the part of rank-and-file members, who concluded it was useless to try hiding critical thoughts. As the Brotherhood was shepherded into orthodoxy, members were reminded constantly that they must never trust themselves, but always look to their spiritual elders for guidance. This encouraged an attitude of mind that automatically censored any criticisms of the Order's overall direction. A final strategy is to convince members that their community operates with a divinely ordained unanimity and that nonconformist thinking constitutes a profanation of this sacred harmony. This illusion of unanimity creates the need for mind guards whose main task is to monitor persons suspected of critical or independent thinking. In the Order, mind guards were often aides to regional directors. These aides constituted an informal intelligence network that kept directors aware of individuals who were out of accord with official thinking. Once such rebels were identified, pressure would be brought to bear upon them, being dismissed from a responsible role, for instance, until they had convinced their superiors that they no longer threatened the community's consensus. It is interesting to note that many CSB practitioners, once Rossi had been removed as Director General, began to reassert their individual viewpoints. As a result, the regional gatherings of 1990 and 1991 became raucous, tempestuous events, with many members expressing long-repressed resentments and anger. Rossi himself, not surprisingly, became the unwilling target of much of this rage. According to several respondents, many members are now seeking outside counseling to overcome their ingrained dependency on paternalistic authority figures. In the final analysis, the history of the Holy Order of Man's, Christ the Savior Brotherhood, is the story of a small band of idealistic individuals who attempted to sustain a compelling religious worldview and community in a rapidly changing cultural environment. Such an attempt accords with the common striving of many thousands of Americans throughout the nation's history. From the time of the first pilgrims at Plymouth Rock, through the Mormon trek to their utopian kingdom of Desiree, to the Church Universal and Triumphant's present efforts to build a mountain stronghold in western Montana. As the annals of history well attest, these efforts fail more often than they succeed. In the hyper-pluralized, simulation-dominated, and fragmented conditions of late 20th century America, the dream of creating an exemplary religious community of the elect has become more tenuous than ever.